Okay, Burgess Shale time. Burgess Shale. You've heard me talk about that a lot. Yeah, because it's important. This is another one of those early Cambrian sites of extraordinary preservation. Burgess Shale type fossils are similar in a lot of ways to Chengjiang. You have none of the hard parts, but you have little casts, mineral casts of a lot of the soft parts, and you have pretty good preservation of a sort of broad swath of the ecosystem, including some very strange creatures. Shown here, look at this thing. This is what we think it looked like maybe from the outside, but this is Eldonia. And at first it just looks like a jellyfish, but then you see that no, it's got like a head and it's got a tail and it's got a gut that runs through all of that. And it's just got these sort of kind of radially symmetric pieces around it. What's an Eldonia? Here's a baby Eldonia. Yeah, it's cute, but it doesn't really answer our question. And it's surrounded by a whole host of autoias, which are a preapulid worm. And here's little eversible proboscis up at this end, and I'm not sure which end it is here. And it looks like that end of this one. Yeah. So there you go. And this one's sitting on top of a little Eldonia. So yeah, apparently those two were best of friends. Yeah, live together, die together. What's it look like? Or rather, where is this? Because we could show a map, but I'll just tell you because it doesn't really matter where it is ultimately. This is something you would find in Canada, and it's up in the northwest of Canada, if I remember right. The mountain is called Mount Yoho, Yoho, and this is a national park, so you are not allowed to collect there. Even if you did, though, you would wander this gigantic hillside, and unless you go to the exact spot, which is like halfway up this mountain, like really high mountain, there's a little tiny quarry there that people have made over the years, taking these out, and that's the one spot where you can find an abundance of pretty good fossils. And everything above it, below it, and beside it is generally pretty poor in terms of fossils. So yeah, Burgess Shale. It's kind of a one in a million place, but boy, yeah, it's a heck of a one. So preservation there, you'll get these carbonate cements. Calcium carbonate is most of what's making those up. And you'll get layers in there, which were layers where there was maybe a little bit of biofilm on the ground, or where there was just a lot of organic stuff going on. And those are the layers, like here in red, like here in white. That's where you will start to get the really good preservation of these animals. So you crack it right at one of those layers and you look inside. And most of the time you crack it, look inside, and you find nothing. But occasionally, you find something pretty cool. So, what was going on at the Burgess Shale location? Well, boy, does this look like Chengjiang, huh? So we think there was an oxycline in that there's an anoxic area, and then we're getting progressively more oxygen as we get toward the surface. That's no mystery. That's kind of the case everywhere in the ocean. Less oxygen the further down you go, unless there's some kind of weird current bringing it in down there. And we think there was a fairly steep slope. And we have some creatures that were living on the slope and had hard parts. And so the hard parts will sometimes be preserved. About mid slope to just barely at the bottom. This is where we think there were a lot of scavengers and just things that sort of burrowed in and eat the remnants of dead stuff. So I guess they're sort of like scavengers, but they're really kind of mining the environment like these preapulid worms. Those get preserved in beautiful detail. Chef's kiss. Just perfect. Because those are the ones that are getting absolutely covered in these little landslides that would come off the land. Then down here, further into the anoxic zone, you will get broken pieces of the animals that lived in either of these zones. It's like Goldilocks. You got a perfect little spot, and you got a little too high on the slope, and you got a little too low on the slope where you just get broken bits. But, those broken bits can be useful if they do actually fossilize. Let's look at some Burgess Shale fossils, shall we? So this is an awesome looking one. It's called Canadia because it's from Canada. Yeah. And this one we think is a polychaete worm, like a worm that has little bristles that would have been made of chitin. And some of these worms will use these to move or swim or who knows what else. This one's probably going along the bottom here. You can see some antenna on the front end. Yeah, we've got great preservation of those scales on the outside. Here is a Naraoya. And this one, you'll remember, is the thing that's pretty similar to trilobites, has been classified with them at different times, but is now considered to be probably distinct enough that it's trilobite shaped. It's a trilobite omorph, but it's not actually a trilobite proper. Because it really only has two body segments, but you can see all the little legs, and you can dissect this and see the gills that are underneath. So yeah, it's sort of like a soft-bodied trilobite adjacent organism. Wouldn't be complete without a brachiopod, but look at this brachiopod. It has the little setae, the little sort of sensory hairs sticking out of it that modern brachiopods still definitely have, but that almost always do not get preserved in the brachiopods that you'll be able to find at places that we are able to go. So yeah, but yeah, good looking brachiopod. And this is one, I'm not sure if there's any of the hard parts still here, or if that is just, there might be a little bit of the hard parts still here. But the hard parts do tend to go and get replaced by various metals. Here's a picaya. And so this little guy, we think, has a spinal cord running along back there. So this may be a primitive chordate, but with, and so these would be something like gills up in here, and sort of elaborate mouth parts and a little antenna up there. I don't know why this one got fractured or why the rock fractured around it, but it is an almost perfect specimen otherwise. So yeah, a little picaya. Here is a early Cambrian. This is an early Cnidarian, we think. And this one does appear to have little tentacles coming out of the top. So those are the soft body parts. Here is the probably not very well mineralized skeleton, the coral skeleton that it would have made. And since it's this type of Burgess Shale preservation, I think most of that actual coral skeleton has been lost, and we've just got an imprint of it there. But we do have some of the soft parts, which is pretty cool and super rare. Here is Tenorhabdotus capulus. This one is believed to be a comb jelly. You've seen this one before, but it's from the Burgess Shale. So look at it. It's like a little chef's hat. Yeah, looking pretty good. Here is a very early echinoderm, so a thing related to starfish. And if you could see this from another angle, you would be able to count that it has five little arms up here, and sort of five-fold symmetry in the center. And it's covered with these little tiny bony plates that are probably actually under the skin while it's alive, because echinoderms have a mesodermal? Yeah, skeleton. Like you have a layer of embryonic layers, an endoderm, mesoderm, and an ectoderm. Ectoderm is going to become your skin. Endoderm is going to become your organs and stuff. And mesoderm, at least in us, becomes our bones, among other things. So they form from the middle layer, and we got that from these guys because we share a common ancestor. Yeah, we're both in the deuterostome club. If you're into your zoology, which you should be, why not? Gotta learn about animals. Here is Odontogryphus. And it's got a crazy, it looks like almost like a U-shaped gut, if we're interpreting that correctly. Some little muscles maybe running across, connected, little eyes up at the front. But more importantly, if you were to look right in here and really zoom into it, it's got little tiny rakes all in a row. These are a radula. This is, if not a mollusk, it is mollusk adjacent and probably an ancestor to actual mollusks. But it has been categorized as being like a mollusk. So somewhere in there is going to have gills, and I'm not sure if they're coming out the back like in a nudibranch, or if that's some of the stuff that we're looking at here, maybe these little cross pieces. But yeah, presumably going along the seafloor and raking up stuff, kind of like Kimberella used to do. Yeah, Here is Aishea. This one is we think it's a kind of a proto-arthropod. It's a thing that's going to become or it's in the crown group that gives us arthropods. This one would be similar to things like hallucigenia, which is like this, but with big old paired spines on its back, similar to a modern velvet worm by the look of it. Can't have a lecture without some sponges, now can we? Yeah, I love a sponge. I love a good sponge. This is Choya. We think this is an early hexactinellid sponge, although the spicules tend to not be preserved because this is the Burgess Shale, and we get soft parts, not hard parts. Burgess is Burgess, if you're trying to write this down, which you should. Yeah, Burgess Shale. The fossils, if you ever see them, they look like black on black. You can't see them unless you're shooting a light at the side of them. What they can do, though, is they can image them under different sort of fluorescent conditions, and they can put them not under water, but under xylene, like the toxic waste thing. And it makes the pictures look really beautiful, and so most of the ones you've seen in here are immersed in xylene, sort of wet, yeah, if you can call being dipped in a chemical wet. But yeah, but these look okay. These are probably preserved in an iron mineral, and the iron has oxidized at some point during its diagenesis. And hey, is that a preapulid worm, or are you just happy to see me? Oh, of course, it's both. It's a great looking preapulid worm. You see this little gut running down the center is what I think that is. Here's its eversible proboscis up there, looking awesome. Have you ever seen a video of a thing called a sea pig? They're sort of pink and translucent and located in the very deep ocean. We think they're relatives of sea cucumbers, but they sort of walk along on these legs, and they look like something from outer space, or like a cartoon about outer space. They don't look normal. Yeah. Anyway, we think this is a Cambrian equivalent of one of those. And you would be able to identify those because they would have tiny little hard parts sprinkled throughout their body. But of course, this is Burgess Shale, so we don't get the hard parts. So we have a thing that is resembling a early walking sea cucumber type organism, and is really what they would call one of the enigmatic ones, one of the things that remain a mystery to science for now. Eventually, maybe they'll discover more, but this one is pretty rare, if I remember correctly. Portalia, yeah. Like you shoot a portal into the wall, you go through to another dimension, and this thing is there to meet you. Now, these are the body fossils of the Burgess Shale, but there are also ichnofossils in the Burgess Shale, particularly a little bit above and below where the body fossils are. So you're usually not completely sure who made the ichnofossil, but you can tell that something was making ichnofossils of this type. So you'll have these little feeding traces going around. You'll have, look at this little exploring trace like that, or maybe these are little fecal pellets. And you have different little sort of patterns connected up. Here's a little, go to the left, go to the right again, go to the left, come back, go to the right. Yeah, you got a searching type behavior from something that was living then. So yeah, we should probably pay more attention to ichnofossils than we do. I'll tell you that. Burgess Shale, where's it from? It's Canadian. Yeah, make a little maple leaf or something. I don't know how you do that with your hands, but yeah, TikTok knows, I bet. What time does it represent? This is the late early Cambrian, or you could call it middle Cambrian. That would be okay too. It's a little bit later than Chengjiang. You do get some of the same genera and some of the same species crossing over, so it wasn't a complete transition. And the fossilization conditions appear to be similar. You get silica casts most commonly of organisms, and we're not sure if it's because they had a lot of silica in them, or if this was just diagenetic silica that got laid down at some point, maybe even replacing whatever was there originally. For each of the fossils, what are their identifying characteristics? So what are we looking at here? What makes this an annelid worm? So you're going to have a number of segments, and the segments are going to be roughly equal. If you could look inside of it, you would see that there's a head end and a tail. There's going to be one long gut that passes through the entire body, and they'll normally have reduplication, like multiple copies of some of the organs. Like this is the origin of the meme where they say, "Oh, an earthworm's got a bunch of hearts." Yeah, which they do. They're in parallel. You'll just have segments, and each one is like a little heart segment, and so it'll help pump the call it blood, but yeah, has a different name. What makes a trilobitomorph a trilobitomorph? Well, it has legs that are paired with gills, and it has a particular type of mouth parts up at the front, which you cannot see in this individual. But the leg-gill combination, like for every leg, there's a gill sitting right behind it. That is very trilobite and friends. Trilobites and co. What makes this a brachiopod? Bilateral symmetry, mineralization of the shell, setae, little feelers coming out, and if we could crack this open, we might be able to see those lophophores, those little feeding arms that kind of look like a heart. Yeah, for Valentine's Day. Picaia, what makes this a probable chordate? Well, we think this black line up here, if I'm reading this right, is the nerve cord, and there's a notochord in here, and I don't know if it's this white thing that sits above it, or if it's this trace down here. This may actually be the gut that I'm pointing to right now. But there are papers that have looked at this thing and think they have identified both a notochord and a nerve cord and pharyngeal gill slits. And those are some of the big characteristics, that and an endostyle, which is usually too small to fossilize. But those are what makes you chordate. Yeah, or fit in with the modern chordates. What makes this one a cnidarian? Tentacles coming out the top, and it's got a stony skeleton that it has made all by its little self. Yeah, one bit at a time. If we were to slice this open, we'd probably see little layers in here, little tabuli sort of blocking it off. Or maybe this is still early enough that we would just see kind of a big empty cup with a great big sort of upside down jellyfish in it. Yeah, hard to know. Those are not common, by the way. What makes this a ctenophore comb jelly? Well, it's the little comb rows, which are kind of hard to read on here, but that's what these are. What makes this a echinoderm? So it has a mesodermal skeleton, which you can see in little plates. We can't tell, but if we could see this a little more clearly, if we had a different type of preservation, the little plates that make up its body would be made of a material called stereom, and we'll get to that when we get to echinoderms. But that's one way you would tell. There would be a thing called an ambulacra, which are a set of grooves, and if it's fivefold symmetry, there's going to be a groove on each of the arms, and it's going to be for catching food and then passing it down like a little conveyor belt into a central mouth. Yeah, which will then eat it. So what makes this a mollusk? Well, it's got a radula, and it's got a muscular foot by the appearance of it. And those two things are enough. The radula is a weird enough, and it's a very molluscan adaptation that this is normally considered to be a mollusk. What makes this an arthropod? What would make this an arthropod is if we can show that it's an ecdysozoan. So if it sheds its skin as it grows, and you would need multiple examples, or an example that's caught in the process of shedding, or some way to tell a newly shed version from an older one that's been for a while. You can see it's got some hard parts. There are no apparently mineralized parts on the inside. There's a little gut that runs through it, but that's kind of it in terms of preservation, which would be consistent. Arthropods are things like bugs. They have like an exoskeleton on the outside. It can be hard or soft. In this case, probably soft. Yeah. What makes a sponge a sponge? In this case, spicules. Although some of the slightly earlier ones from the early Cambrian, those Archaeocyathra, remember, did not have spicules. So maybe they were a different branch. Maybe spicules were always there. Maybe spicules were never there. Maybe these are just sister groups. I don't know. It's fossils. Could be anything. What makes this a preapulid worm? An eversible proboscis that's covered in little spines for digging into stuff. Probably for digging its hole that it lives in, and maybe also for burrowing into carcasses and stuff like that. Hard to say, yeah. What makes this such a weirdo? Because it just is. Look at it. Look what a weirdo it is. So yeah, and those are ichnofossils. So there we go. What body parts are preserved and lost? Soft preserved, hard lost generally. What do the Burgess Shale ichnofossils show? They show behavior of probably some of the same organisms that are fossilized on the middle slope, but you can see what they were doing before they got swept over the cliff down into the anoxic zone and murdered by these landslides that left us very nice fossils, but were probably very unpleasant on the organisms that were caught up in them. Compare and contrast Burgess Shale and Chengjiang fossilization, pretty similar. You tend to get iron compounds making the outlines of the fossils in Chengjiang. You tend to get silica outlines, but also some iron in the Burgess Shale. And you'll get little bits of phosphate here and there, particularly in Chengjiang, to give it some of the extra colors. The biota are similar. You have maybe more diversity of arthropods in Chengjiang than in the Burgess Shale, but they were just a different place. You don't have every animal living in every ecosystem, and so yeah. And then Chengjiang is a little earlier, and Burgess Shale is a couple million years after that. So that's plenty about the Burgess Shale, I bet. Yeah. Thank you.